Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the studio for part 2 of making a resin mother mold on my sculpture Empyrean that we made before the summer. In part 1, we covered materials and procedure thoroughly, so if you haven't watched part 1, start out there. A lot of the things that we covered in part 1 will be glossed over here in part 2 in favor of covering the design of the mold and how the whole thing comes together. We made one piece of the mother mold in part 1, and today we'll make the other 13. Now it did not take me one day to make all 13 pieces, however. It took me several days, and you'll see that by the clothes change. The reason I start off with the legs is that I want a good support at the bottom of the sculpture before adding a ton of weight at the top. The front half of the legs, the one you are looking at right here, is made up of 3 pieces, 2 big ones and a tiny one. They are designed so that there is an order to how they come apart. The first piece we made in part 1 will be the first piece to come off. The one we're making here will be the second. Because of the direction the second piece comes off, we have an undercut right at a bump in the crotch. The mold would have gotten caught on this and it would not have come off. There's a few different ways to solve such an issue. My preferred method is to make another piece to my mother mold essentially, by finding the exact peak of the form that will create the undercut and making a separating wall right there out of clay. You could also do what's called a key, which is a piece of mother mold inside your mother mold, filling out an undercut. I find that keys are more work most of the time, so I just make another mother mold piece. They serve exactly the same purpose. The deciding factor in what piece comes off first is the angle of the clay wall you are making to separate the pieces. It's easier to err on the side of caution here and not hope to create a perfectly angled clay wall where both pieces can come off at the same time. It's easier to lean in the other direction and purposefully make the wall angled so that one piece will come off first. It's best if the piece that's meant to come off first is set against the silicone separating wall, as the silicone has some give, which will be more forgiving when trying to pry the mold apart later. On the back half of the legs, we will again have 3 pieces of mother mold making up the back of the legs. There is a huge undercut, as you can see, right behind the right hamstring. This could have been solved with a key, which would have meant 2 pieces of mother mold in total, but as I said, it likely would have been just as much, if not more work, so I went with 3 pieces of mother mold. As the view of the back half of the legs changes here, you'll be able to see how, from some views, certain parts disappear from view. This is an undercut, and if there is no view from which there is no undercut, well, then you will have to make several pieces of mother mold. The trick then is to ensure that none of the pieces have undercuts in them, and that the area where they separate is right at the peak of the form that turns into an undercut. In this case, the piece we start off with, the piece on the right, will be the first piece to come off. This one was tricky, because if I built the wall the way I prefer when making it for the piece that is to come off first, the bottom half of the wall would have been very close to the calf of the left leg, leaving me no room to make a wall there on that piece later. So the top half of this wall is at an angle that I prefer for the piece that is to come off first, and the bottom half is closer, a lot closer, to 90 degrees, which is risky. If the wall is less than 90 degrees, it could get locked into the other piece. It becomes like a wedge in that scenario. If the angle is greater than 90 degrees, then the other piece will have to have a wall of less than 90 degrees. The wall with greater than 90 degree angle is very likely the one that will come off first, as it can be lifted off the other one without friction and with much more possibility of movement. The piece with a wall with an angle less than 90 degrees cannot be lifted up, as it's underneath the other wall and will have to be slid out from underneath the other wall. This limits where the piece can go as you take it off, making it harder and sometimes impossible. If you have a wall with both, now that's potentially trouble. And that's what I have right here, but this piece is meant to be pulled away from the wall, not up along it. So even though the wall is a little twisted, it shouldn't present me with too much trouble in this case, but it's definitely something to watch out for. The mold for the legs had to be designed in this intricate way because the legs are twisting around each other. They have spaces in between them. They're essentially a complicated pair of legs, with the left leg ending up behind the right leg. In most scenarios, it's a lot easier than this. You'll see once we get to the torso, which will be very simple, and in most cases I'd say the legs should be as simple as that. If there was no twisting, we probably would have been able to get away with one piece per half. But because we had to get fancy with the sculpture, we gave ourselves a lot of trouble and a lot more work in the mold making. You can probably see that I cover a lot of the mold with plastic while I'm working. Once a piece of the mold is finished, I really don't want to mess up the stunning finish that I've put on it. This resin material really sticks to itself, and if there are drips all over the surface of an already finished piece, it doesn't look very professional and it's very hard to clean up and fix. So a thin sheet of plastic does the trick, and it's only a few seconds of extra effort for a slightly nicer result. And I think it's worth it. For this last piece on the legs, you can really see how there is no way this piece will be the first to come off. Because of the form of the calf creating an undercut, the piece will need to come off 90 degrees perpendicular to the silicone wall. And it cannot do that because there is another piece in the way holding it in place. On to the upper part of the mold. The upper part is a lot simpler than the legs, with the exception that the arms and hands will be separate pieces. The main body, however, is quite simple and easy. The back is the easiest, and so I start there. Always good to get the easy stuff out of the way, I think. The back will be one big piece. There are no undercuts here because I planned to make this one piece from the beginning. To make sure it ended up as one piece, I pushed or moved the silicone wall separating the front and the back half slightly further towards the back. This ensures that the front half definitely will need two pieces, but it would have needed two pieces anyways. When I do big pieces like this that have very soft forms and very soft undulations in the surface, I can get away with using really big pieces of fiberglass. This type of fiberglass doesn't lay down super easy if the surface is rough and bumpy. But with a big smooth surface like this, you can save a ton of time using big pieces. I try to always overlap the pieces and still use two layers, like always, trying to make sure that the pattern is not the same from the first layer to the second layer, and this ensures extra strength. Let's take a moment to thank today's sponsors, my Patreon supporters on Patreon, who have ensured the continued existence of this channel and allowed me to upgrade my gear bit by bit, making the channel better looking and better sounding. If you are interested in supporting the channel, or perhaps interested in getting personal feedback on your sculptures from me, then Patreon is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armatures, supplies, mold making, anything you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. So check it out. There's a link in the description below. And again, thank you so much to those of you who have given generously and supported me. It really means the world to me. For a large piece like this, that will have to lay open on a table while I cast inside them, which I'll show you guys very soon in an upcoming video, it's helpful if the piece doesn't rock and move too much. I could obviously stabilize the mold piece with a bag of clay or a block of wood or something like that, but if I can build in a stable surface from the get-go, it's better. So the poles that I add to every piece to make them more rigid and to give me something to hook my bungee cords to when holding the two halves together will, if designed and made nicely, serve as support structures for the mold when it lays on the table. I often forego this feature because of how much effort it requires. However, it's actually not a lot of effort at all, and I should do this more in the future as it makes life so much easier when you're casting in your mold. And I think that's a lesson that every mold maker should take with them. Not only should you make your own molds, you should try and use the mold you've made and cast in it to properly see how well the mold was actually made. If the mold is easy to cast in, you've done something right. A lot of times, I've forgotten to consider how I'm going to cast in my mold when making it, and it often enough ends up with the mold being painful and difficult to cast in. Only experience can tell you these things, however. Exactly what qualities a mold that's easy to cast in needs is a little difficult to quantify, but there are a few things that jump out. The pieces should not be too big. Huge pieces are really hard to move and to cast in, as casting almost always involves some sort of lifting and moving them all around. You can always attach your sculpture back together after you've cast it. Make sure there is a decently sized entryway into your mold if possible, at least one you can stick your arm inside. This helps a lot when dealing with the seam of your piece and making sure the two halves of the piece are locked together properly. It's not always possible, but when it is, it's smart to make sure that this happens. A third thing would be to make sure you have a clean surface of the mold, one without sharp edges you can cut yourself on, one without fiber or burlap sticking out that could potentially be a place for the mold to begin ripping. Try to make a pretty mold. They tend to work for you, while an ugly mold, more often than not, works against you. As you've seen, the arms are extremely straightforward, 2 pieces per arm and a very simple shape to make. Not a whole lot to the arms really. The hands, on the other hand, were a little more difficult, and the difficult part was hard to capture on film. As you can see, the upper part, the back of the hand, were easy enough, one simple piece. The real tricky part here was the inside of the hand, because the hand are kind of semi-closed, both of them. One piece would have gotten trapped inside the hand, like the sculpture was holding the piece or something like that. So the inside needed 2 pieces, and they needed to have the wall in between them at the correct angle to each other so that one would slide out easily first, and then the other could be moved out after it. And this was actually quite tricky. When I make the video casting this piece, I will show the hand mold and talk about it in depth, and show how it works. However, in this case, I don't really have any footage that shows well what's going on while I'm working upside down on the hand, so I apologize for this. You will see and have this hand mold explained in depth in a future video coming soon. So we got away with one piece on the back of the torso. Actually, we designed our way to that solution. But now we have to pay the price, which is making 2 pieces for the front. However, there is a scenario where you almost always need to have 2 pieces for the front no matter what you do. And that is when the head is looking to the side. If the head looks to the side, you'll have an undercut towards the side the head is looking. As you can probably see here, the head is looking to the right, or our left, and the undercut is on the right, or our left. Right where the head meets the raised arm. By splitting the piece in 2, we solve this issue easily. It's important to place the clay wall, which will separate the 2 pieces, right at the peak of the face. So if he was looking more sideways than he is, the wall would not go up the middle of his face, which it does here. It would go up the side, as the side would be the peak of the form. Like all the other pieces, these 2 pieces will be held together by bolts. But there's also registration dimples on the wall so that they'll go together nicely and easily. To avoid drilling into those and ruining the hard work I've done to make them, I mark where they are with a black marker, so I'll know where not to drill. Now the only really tricky thing here is to remember if you marked where you are supposed to drill or where you are not supposed to drill. I always mark where the registration is, in other words, where not to drill. So stay consistent and always do the same thing, and there will never be any confusion here. By now, you've seen how this works many times over, and I will not bore you with the details of this last piece, which in all fairness had nothing spectacular or special going for it. Thank you so much for watching. Next week there might be another vlog, there might be another mold making video. I haven't really decided yet. Soon I'll have some new sculpting content, however, as I'm about to start some new sculptures, and I'm really excited to share that with you. If you enjoyed the video and want to learn sculpture, check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. And awfully soon, by November 1st actually, there will be exclusive sculpting content on my Patreon page. The first series we are embarking on is the Beginner's Guide to Sculpting the Figure. I'm super excited to finally be creating exclusive content for Patreon, and I hope you'll be too, and we'll take a look. The link to my Patreon is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.